a proud member of the circular economy for the last 2 decades. I was really fortunate in my career that I started out with Schneider Electric, and I worked in the Middle East, Africa, and India. And I first saw biochar in 2010 when I was working to stand up the Access to Energy program, and I got hooked from there. I mean, I saw this really powerful solution and use case. The first time I saw it was actually in Kenya. And then I worked on a lot of biochar projects, circular economy projects in India, regenerative ag projects, etc. And over time, you start to realize this is something I may want to do from a full-time capacity and a full-time basis. And we co-founded Grain during the pandemic, and we're very, very focused on accelerating the use case around circular economy. We're going to talk about a lot of different things in this presentation. I do want to say, to quote Charlie Chaplin, a day without laughter is a day wasted. And I have had so much fun in the day and a half I've been here. A lot of laughter, a lot of joking, a lot of fun stuff. It's a tricky time right now as somebody who's spent a lot of time in Washington. And I think it's important to just take a step back and realize what we're all trying to do collectively together and have some fun while we're doing it. And Indigo, you can put it up a little bit more because we're combating with some of the noise out there. Thank you. So let's get started. And I like to start the discussion a little bit, take a step back, and let's reorient ourselves around what we're really talking about here. So one of the topics that somebody who's studied economics and international finance has been tragedy of the commons. I probably visited around 180 different sites last year around the world. One thing there's a couple of things I've noticed. For those of you that were at the US Biochar Conference last year, there were some really important thought leaders on stage that spent a lot of time talking about different things that are choking demand and basically driving out or rooting out incentives. And one of them was essentially where capital is being allocated. I think a lot of us have seen money being allocated around direct air capture, certainly billions of dollars a couple of years ago into that space. It has a role to play, but we need to help educate around the economics and what biochar brings to the table. So it's important to not just look at one solution, but to ensure that we're bringing capital to many other carbon removal technologies. We've seen elements around market fragmentation. I know some of my friends at USBI, USBC, the Minnesota Biochar Initiative, NRCS that were talking yesterday, talked a lot about market fragmentation and resource depletion, and of course, incentives. We have seen the power of what biochar can bring to the table. We know that a lot of the soils in this country, they used to be 10% carbon. Now you're lucky in many cases to get 3, 2, 1%. Having spent many years living in Europe as an example, and eating a lot of the food there, meeting a lot of the farmers there. We're the few that meet and feed the many in this country. We have to help our farmers to be successful. Biochar can be a little bit more expensive up front, but those incentives are really, really critical. And we're fighting hard to make sure those incentives stay on the table. Now, one of the book, I do a lot of reading, and if you've done a Zoom call or video call with me, you'll see this book on the top right corner. I switch them out every quarter. This is a book that I highly recommend because it breaks down the basic economics of the situation that we're dealing with in a very simple way. This is a guy that is the ultimate capitalist. Tom ran for president in 2020 on the Democratic ticket, really on a play around circular economy, waste to value, and climate. What's really interesting about the book is he highlights some fascinating things. I like to drill into statistics. I think it's a good way to break things down. What he talks a lot about is there's mention around biochar in the book. He talks about the amount of money and environmental benefits. He talks a lot about potential for the waste to value sector. Think about it. $700 billion needs to be invested in this space. I think that's actually a little conservative. And we're looking at a potential for a $10 trillion return. So again, if you think about this opportunity, and there's a bunch of investors that are here, many of which have come to our booth and we've had discussions, there's a lot more interest. I'm based in New York City. Before Grain, I was in the private equity side financing energy as a service companies. And I can tell you, people are looking at this space. They're thinking about how do we bring this process into a barbell approach? How do we basically break it out a little bit more and improve the economics for our portfolio? Our LPs, our GPs, etc. And more importantly, as we all know, as many of us do, and I see Bernie nodding over there from Artie, the potential with biochar is massive, but we need the technology to be able to scale. It's really critical. We have some incredible technology companies here. I've been blown away by some of the booths and discussions I've had. And these are the people that are executing and making the things that are going to move the needle and help us get where we have to go. So I think that's key. And what it feeds into is something that, I've been bought into for a long time. A couple of weeks ago, I was very fortunate to do a webinar with the founder of CDR.FYI, Robert Hoagland, and we talked a lot about carbon markets and the role of carbon markets. Many of the projects we work on today may not necessarily need carbon markets or need carbon credits to be profitable. However, it's a really critical piece of the story, and I can tell you from firsthand experience, there is a very high demand right now for biochar carbon credits. One of the investors in our company is Schneider Electric. They've got a large portfolio of corporate stakeholders. We're going to look a little bit more later in the presentation at the breakout between the different players, but the demand is there. I actually had a direct air capture portfolio company call me recently looking for biochar credits because they're not meeting the demand to be able to retire the credits that they've committed to. It's a big problem. It's why in the first slide he highlighted, you've got to have disbursement of engagement when it comes down to it. These are just some high-level statistics that we've gotten recently. I highly encourage folks, if you haven't, to listen to that webinar that I did with Robert Hoagland. I think he's one of the brightest minds. We had him at our US Biochar Revolution talk during Climate Week. He really gets it, and he's a big fan of biochar, and it continues to emerge as one that people are watching close at. One of the other things we launched during Climate Week that's really important is an investor series. I get asked a lot of the same questions about what do investors look for when it comes to these projects? Waste to energy, RNG, biofuels, biochar, etc. I had the privilege of sitting down with people that have invested in these projects across the capital stack. If you go to the Grain Ecosystem YouTube channel, you can listen to some of these discussions about equity financing. Tanner Martin is here with Ameris Bank. He might be somewhere in the crowd here. We did a talk together looking at catalytic capital and grant money. There's a lot of it out there. I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. I spent 4 years living in Dubai. UAE hosted COP28. There was a big commitment from the Loss and Damage Fund. We still haven't seen those commitments materialize. So we've got to hold these big leaders and big investors accountable to allocate that capital. That's what this group is here to do. But that's really important. And obviously thinking about bank debt, USDA loans is really important. And of course, I'm going to look into detail in a bit more on the carbon removal side of things. We'll look at pre-purchases, spots, forwards, what the market is bearing right now. And in addition, it's important to understand what is the cost of capital. So at the booth over the last couple of days, I've talked to some incredible, innovative thought leaders that are looking to build real businesses. But it's important to understand, if you're going to build a business, how do you want to go raise that capital, especially with all the non-dilutive capital we have on the table right now that is looking to come and invest in these projects. I have a lot of confidence right now in some of the money that's coming from USDA and NRCS. Unfortunately, I missed the presentation yesterday, but as one of the market committee leaders for the US Biochar Coalition, I can tell you that a lot of that money is getting unfrozen, whether it's the biochar incentive programs, REAPs, RCPP, etc. We have to have confidence as a group that with the Make America Healthy activities are going to align around soil and water filtration. So I remain hopeful and active. I did a talk with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse last week, which is going to come out next week. And he talks a lot about what the Senate is doing to drive some of this stuff forward. But it's key to know that you should double down on grants, non-dilutive capital, and then look to the other legs of the stool. And this is typically what you can expect from the other parts of the capital stack. And just diving a little bit deeper, this is one of my favorite slides, because you think about what is the multiple on invested capital. All investors are trying to get a return. It's all a little bit different. Again, it's a little bright, but you could see philanthropic is 1 to 2, private equity 2 to 4, and then venture 5 to 10 and higher. So that's key, especially if you're looking for growth capital. There's different models of pre-purchase. So direct to business, which I was alluding to earlier. These are companies like Cargill, Pepsi, Nestle, and others that are either looking to do pre-purchase or spots. We actually have seen examples of companies that are looking to buy credits forward, sell the credits in real time, and re-inject that capital into their value chain to help do insetting. Very important, because these value chains, it all comes down to economics. It improves the top and bottom line for these companies if they decarbonize the supply chain. I had the privilege of meeting the CSO of Pepsi and sitting down with him for coffee during Reuters in New York City. He's got 3 big goals: crop resilience, farmer livelihoods, and achieving his Scope 3 ambitions. You get there by engaging with these types of projects and giving your value chain players opportunities. And I'll tell you, one of the learnings for me, those value chain players, they don't have to stay with Pepsi. those farmers, they could go to other places. And that's important. That's why programs like many of the ones that are in the audience, in the room today that we're offering is critical for these companies to understand. And then you think about, you've got credit sales through partners, and then of course, carbon streaming or credit streaming agreements. I did a talk with Alec Kushner for carbon streaming. He gives a good perspective on what those look like. You've got companies like Rubicon as well that are out there that are doing a great job in terms of, these are ex-banking leaders that are coming into the space to drive it forward. And again, some of the common types of bank loans, which we're very familiar with. You have a lot of representatives at this conference. Now, what mixes are good ones? What works in practice? So we, over the last 3 years, have looked at around 250 biochar projects, give or take, globally. And what I can tell you is the projects that have gotten funded and the projects that are happening, at least in North America, scenario A, they've got about 60 to 70% in bank loans and debt capital. And the rest is a mix of carbon removal pre-purchases, which would go up to 30%. With the carbon removal pre-purchases, you can get up to 50% upfront. And then the rest at NTP and COD, notice to proceed and commercial operation date. And then there's a mix of equity financing. The groups that do the equity financing are typically pre-existing businesses. These could be pre-existing sugar mills, lumber mills, etc., dairy farms. And then on the other side of the coin, you could have a mix of grants, bank loans, and then equity financing. One of the things we've been trying to solve is that bridge capital. We need more catalytic capital, more bridge capital that's allowing these project developers to do the critical work to get to a decision from the investment committee to move these projects forward, or even to do pilots. I met with a lot of people at the conference that are looking to do piloting. But that's a big part of the story when you think about, all right, what are the scenarios? How do I do these projects? And to give you an example, and this is one of the reasons why I like to wear the jumpsuit, because I spend a lot of time on site. We get really dirty. I was just at an equestrian site recently, a lot of horse manure, 120,000 tons a year of horse manure locked in. This is a sugar mill. There's a YouTube video of me on site here to give perspective. That is what we call Mount Begas. It is, you can see it from space. And typically when people reach out, at our booth, we say your waste is worth it, because at the end of the day, the story in the US right now is a waste problem. As much as I love carbon sequestration, I'm going to pound the table as hard as I can for it. A lot of people are spending millions of dollars to manage waste. They had alligators, actually. The first day I pulled up, there was a guy on horseback with a shotgun, because they've got alligators all over these sites. This is in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So you've got alligators, you've got to manage that. There's a lot of odors and smells. And then, of course, dealing with the feedstock, etc. So if we could come to the table and help remove that waste problem and create economic streams of revenue in the form of carbon credits, biochar. Some projects have wood vinegar. Some projects have bio oil. Other projects have electricity. We have a lot of experience with PPAs, VPPAs, selling to the grid. I was talking to PG&E at our booth the other day. Interconnection's an issue. A lot of people don't realize last year, 40 gigawatts of renewable energy was essentially in a position to go on grid, but at the end of the day, about 9 to 8 gigawatts of electricity was actually utilized. So we have a big interconnection problem, and then there's a resilience issue. I came from a world of doing microgrid projects. So building out a pyrolysis or a gasification facility on site can bring all of that to the table, and then you could do 48E, potentially 48E tax credits. We are fighting hard to make sure 45 and 48 tax credits stay on the table, and we've been fighting, of course, to make sure that when you think about 45 tax credits, they're more carbon neutral and not just direct air capture or CCUS. So that's something that we were very active at doing when it came to the ultimately our work with the Biochar Coalition. And these guys, 4 million tons sitting there, and then they've got another 300,000 tons a year. So it's a real live use case, and we're seeing these use cases across the stack, and we're helping them solve these problems. It's really important, and it's why ultimately myself and my co-founders quit our jobs to do this, because we saw how real the pain was. Now, I'll come full circle to grain. So I always like to say the most important thing in a business, make reversible decisions quick and irreversible decisions deliberately. Because when you are managing resources and capabilities, that is critical. If you do not do that, you'll be out of business fast. So grain is trying to help people understand quickly, what can you do with the scenario you have? Life, my friends, is an odds game. I learned that also early on. you need to work to tilt the odds in your favor. So we are trying to tilt the odds in the favor of doing these projects and having success. How do we do it? Well, we've got 3 structures. The first structure is really what I like to call, even before design, a jobs to be done structure, working with people that have waste or have a line to technology or maybe offtake, and help them think about what can I realistically do? Do I have access to the feedstock? Do I have a technology already selected? Just learning a little bit more and then doing some high-level eligibility around the methodologies. In the design stage, it's really all about teeing projects up to improve the odds that they're going to be able to be successful. So when I think about what we do at Grain, it should no longer be, what I used to say is courage is knowing what not to fear. A lot of people fear doing these projects because it's daunting. Lots of paperwork. I see Dave shaking his head up front. We know from a legal background, there's a lot of parts and pieces to these projects, but you got to make it easy for people. You've got to use data and technology. We've seen a lot of stuff to try to drive it. So on the front end, we try to get projects to a position where they can understand the optimal scenarios. What is the ROI? What's the NPV? What's the IRR? And be able to defend with confidence in front of an investor. Because in most cases, you've got one shot with an investor, and it's very hard to go back or backpedal. So we try to build out those economic models, and we have a Grain investor network of around 120 different investors that are pre-purchasers, structured credit, debt, growth equity that are looking and have a thesis around waste to value in biochar that are there. And then on the downside, we're building out all the other elements. Investors would say, well, we're investing in these projects. How are you going to ring fence these projects to essentially support with the cash flows, support with the engagement with the registries, really keep things tight? And that's where we've launched our build and operate. And for us, we want to work with developers that can really scale, they're passionate, and they have access to the critical feedstock that's on the table. And I'll just say, kind of in closing, the mindset is really to be collaborative. We picked ecosystem for a reason. There are a lot of people in this room that are doing many different things, from lab testing and analysis, life cycle assessments, sourcing feedstock, developing world-class technology. We have to lift each other up. We can't bring people in the industry down. We all have to drive up together because it's all interrelated. If somebody has a bad experience with biochar offtake or biochar technology, we're all going to be tainted by that. So it's best we work together now. I could tell you 3 years ago when I left my job to start this company and I did my first talk at Columbia University, people were kind of like smirking and laughing. What's this biochar thing? Why are you working on this thing? The first thing a lot of people want to do is kind of find ways to cut this stuff down. 3 years later, we're really excited and encouraged by what we're seeing. Even at this conference, all the discussions and engagement, as I've said before, always available, always willing to be engaged. We're over at booth 436, and I would encourage you to check out, we've got these newspapers. And in these newspapers, it's all about economics and real projects. I think the thing that's blown me away the most at this conference, the people here are really serious about doing stuff. And to me, I always say when I give a talk, the magic is what happens after. So when we're back here in this room in a year, what will we have accomplished collectively as a group? What partnerships have come together to drive something home as a solution? Because we want to be on the ground to highlight that and scream it from the rafters. Whether we've worked with you rafters, whether we work with you or not, that's the most important thing, is highlighting some of the great work that's happening here. And I'm looking at this audience, and I'm looking at Frarys, I'm looking at Arty, I'm looking at Pyreg, I'm looking at Phoenix Energy, I'm looking at Electotherm, I'm looking at all these incredible companies that are here. I'm looking at Joel that's driving the philanthropic capital and the grant writing. I'm looking at Local. So together, we're going to get it done and we're going to have big success. And I'm just honored at the end of what's been a very, very busy day, you took the time to come here and listen to the presentation. We have a lot of good stuff out there. And as I said, feel free to scan this. We'll send some materials. We've got a lot of good content online. And with that, I am right on time. I am going to wrap up, and I will be around to talk to anybody for the next couple of hours, preferably by the bar. My colleague Michael is at the booth. And again, thank you so much for your time and attention. It's been a real privilege. And thank you, BBI, Biomass International Biomass Magazine. You're doing great work.